Hi, my name is Jesse Mwai. I am a pastor with Christ is the Answer Ministries. Currently, I am the senior pastor of Christ is the Answer Ministries here in Woodley. We are just around Ngong Road. I want to just have a conversation with you, and my question first and foremost is, by the way, do you go to church? Or at least do you watch maybe something to do with church on TV once in a while? And I know that a lot of times people talk about worship, especially when you think about church. And I want to ask you a question. What is worship? What do we mean when we talk about worship? When you are thinking about worship and we hear people talking about praise and worship, or sometimes we talk about praise and worship in our church. We say, oh, the praise and worship was so nice. It was so beautiful. What does worship mean to you? I want us just to have a small conversation as we ask ourselves, what is worship? But more specifically, what is biblical worship? When we talk about worship, I think it assumes that we are in agreement that there must be a God somewhere, because you can only worship when there is a God, someone who is bigger than you, a more supreme being, a bigger being than yourself. That's the only reason why you'll find yourself worshiping. So what is worship? What is biblical worship? There's an interesting conversation, by the way, in the scriptures, where Jesus Christ one day found himself sitting by the well, and he was just relaxing, waiting for his disciples who had gone to get some meal. It was around lunch hour, and as he was sitting just by this well, a certain woman comes up, to draw some water from the well, and Jesus strikes a conversation with this woman. And as they begin talking, what simply begins as what seemingly to be just a simple request for a glass of water, just for a drink of water, because the sun was hot and I'm sure Jesus was thirsty. This conversation ended up being a big conversation, a theological conversation on worship. And Jesus Christ eventually says some very, very interesting words. In fact, I think the biggest lesson he ever taught on worship, or the biggest statement he ever said on worship, was within this context, talking to this particular woman. This is what he said. He told her this. He said in verse 21 of John chapter 4, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they're the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." And then he concluded by saying this: God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. Very interesting conversation. Notice what Jesus said. He said that a time is coming, and actually has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And he said that these are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. But we read this particular verse many times, but we ask ourselves, what exactly did Jesus mean when he said that we must worship him in spirit and in truth? In fact, earlier on there, Jesus also said that God is actually seeking for those who will worship. He is looking for those who will worship in spirit and in truth. That also means then that it's possible to worship, but it's not in spirit and in truth. And in this conversation I want us to have, we then have to ask ourselves, who are these worshippers the Father is seeking? What does it mean to worship in spirit and in truth? What does it mean? Is my worship just about lifting up my hands in church, singing some good praise and worship in the church, or maybe listening to a good sermon, or maybe praying? What exactly is worship? And I want you to think about it, and I want you to ask yourself that question. But on this first installment of this series that we're going to be having, I want to first and foremost provoke you to begin thinking, asking yourself, what is worship? And ask yourself, am I a worshiper? Do I qualify to be a worshiper? What does God mean when he said that he seeks those who worship him in spirit and in truth? For more of this conversation, I want you to begin thinking about yourself and ask yourself, am I a worshiper? Is God pleased with my worship? And we will continue tomorrow, even as we continue talking about worship. And even as I conclude, I want to just give a special appeal to you. If you don't go to church, I want to challenge you this coming week, maybe this coming Sunday, why don't you wake up in the morning and find your way into church as we try to answer this question about worship. And as you go to church, let's have this conversation next week. And I'm sure you'll have already begun thinking a few things about worship. And when you go to church, just go with an open mind, with an open heart, and just experience what the other believers are experiencing. If you don't have a church to go to, I welcome you. Come to Citam Woodley this coming Sunday. Our first service is at 8:30. The second service is at 11. You can make your choice. You can make your pick. We'll be glad to receive you. God bless you.